Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Hello and welcome to the Price of Football podcast with me, Kevin Day, and Professor the Baron, Kieran Maguire.
Hello.
Hello. This is the podcast that follows the money behind a beautiful game, and this is the Monday version of the podcast. So it's your questions. Good weekend, Kieran? It doesn't feel like 3 days since we saw each other, does it?
We're at time. Well, I think we're bonded at the hip these days, Kevin.
Yes, because we, as people now know, as I mention it often enough, we're doing 4 in the same day. We're doing really, it's a kind of podcast sweatshop. Shocking. Now, we've had lots of questions from you lovely people, which is the reason we're doing these specials, because there's so many questions to get through. First one is from Sean Hubbard. Hello, Sean. Well, Sheffield United has been mentioned quite a lot on this pod with the shenanigans versus the ground, but what Sean wants to know is the fallout of the ownership battle. The owners have fallen out, so what's the fallout of the falling out? Especially because the McCabe family, who own part of the club, also own all the club's property.
Well, the battles between Sheikh Abdullah from Saudi Arabia, and he bought half of the club. I think he bought the share for £1, but he invested £10 million into the club in total. And then you've got Kevin McCabe, who's a local businessman who owns the other half. And that was okay initially, but they very quickly realised that they didn't like each other and struggled to work with each other. So
it was a personal relationship thing rather than artistic differences.
Yeah, I think Prince Abdullah's team, they felt that they weren't being listened to, and Kevin McCabe was doing what he wanted in terms of recruitment, managers and so on. And they did have, and this was inserted by a silver-tongued lawyer, a clause which allowed one of them to buy the other half out for £5 million.
Is that normal in business?
Yeah, it can operate like that, especially if you've got two people who aren't familiar with each other, and also if you don't think that the business is going to make a fortune. So if you and I went into business together, what we might say is that over the course of the next 5 years, if one of us starts to lose interest, rather than me selling my shares to somebody who you don't know and you've got a complete stranger coming into the business, you effectively get what's referred to as first dibs on being able to buy the shares at an agreed price.
It's not technically called first dibs, Kieran, is it? But is that could you trigger that clause in the contract regardless of whether could you just think, right, he's losing interest, I'm triggering the clause, or does it have to be agreed between both of you?
Well, it comes down to the nature of the contract. It
Right.
comes down to the individual clauses and conditions, but I think initially Sheffield United wasn't making any money, so neither of them wanted to trigger the clause. But Sheffield United have actually come up from League One.
Yeah.
So at League One level, it wouldn't have been made sense, but they got promoted to the Championship under the magnificent manager Chris Wilder, who's one of my heroes.
Yep. Could end up in Europe the way things are going as well.
And that would be superb.
Yeah.
I think that would be superb for the Premier League. It would certainly be superb for Sheffield United. I'm not sure Wednesday fans would be quite as gracious about it.
So this is a shorter pod, remember, I have to keep reminding myself. How is this going to end then for the individuals concerned and for Sheffield United?
Well, it went before a judge, and it became very complicated. Both were making accusations one against the other. The judge ruled in favour of Sheikh Abdullah being able to buy the shares in the company, but another company owned by Kevin McCabe that owns the ground and the training ground.
Right.
And the way that it works, in my understanding, is that once Sheikh Abdullah has all of the shares in the football club, he must then buy the ground and the training ground at market prices. Now, there's two issues here. A, does he have the money? And B, as we've already established, nobody actually knows how much a football ground is worth, because we saw Birmingham City last week. They sold their ground to themselves, but they sold it for 22 million, and they're 3 miles away from Villa Park, where it went for 57, which in turn was nothing compared to Hillsborough and all the others. So trying to work out these figures is very difficult, but also you can see it from Kevin McCabe's point of view. He doesn't want to sell for £5 million a half share in a Premier League football club, which is going to be in the Premier League next season. Potentially it's going to be in Europe as well, so therefore it's worth considerably more than £5 million.
Is there anything for Sheffield United fans to worry about, or is this a purely internal dispute between two very rich men that won't have any real ramifications for the club?
I think fans should be relatively relaxed. Chris Wilder signed a new 4.5-year contract last week, so that would indicate that he's clearly on good terms with whoever his line manager is, and he must have had reassurances from both parties in terms of the ownership. Kevin McCabe is now considering making an appeal, and this could drag through the courts for a further 2 years, which will make lawyers and accountants rich.
All right, well, let's move to a club not far down the road. This is a question from David Bassett, presumably not that David Bassett, but hello, David. He's a Forest fan, and I like the way he's put this question. He finds their ownership interesting. And now, when you use the word interesting, that's always the antennae starts to twitch. It's owned by Olympiacos owner Evangelos Mariankis. He says, basically, and we have discussed this before, why are you allowed to own two clubs? And what are the financial fair play implications of the fact that there have been transfers between the two clubs both ways? And basically, Dave wants to know, are those transfers a way of getting around financial fair play regulations? Because they're a club, their previous investor put a lot of money in. They haven't had a manager who's lasted a full season since 2010. So they're quite a volatile club, it seems to me, financially.
Yes, and they've lost an awful lot of money in recent years whilst being in the Championship. The Championship is sort of the graveyard of clubs in terms of trying to break even. They were owned by Al-Hazawi, who was a Libyan air conditioning magnate. And
I don't know why that made me laugh, I'm sorry.
And they were advertising his company on Forest shirts, which seemed a bit strange because there's not a lot of demand for air conditioning in Nottingham. But what we are seeing is many club owners are using their companies through shirt sponsorship because you can potentially nudge up the value of the deal. So, of course, that counts towards FFP. But going into the multi-club ownership rules, you cannot have an investment in two or more clubs in a single country. And when we discussed this with Bill Kenwright last year in terms of him wanting to effectively be generous towards Bury Football Club, and the EFL turned round and told him to go away. However,
so it was all right, for example, for Du Châtelet to own many clubs across Europe as well as Charlton.
Yes, and it's the same with the City Football Group, who own clubs in China, Japan, Australia, America, India, and Uruguay.
Yes,
bafflingly. So, and the reason for that is that those clubs are not competing against each other. So, therefore, the integrity of the competition, and let's face it, there's not a lot of integrity in football in many regards, but at least when we go to watch a football match here in England, I'm pretty convinced that both sets of players are setting out to win, regardless of whether one team is clearly better than the other, and we as fans, we buy into that as well.
Well, hang on a sec. What happens if Forest get into the Premier League, get into the UEFA Cup, and then play Olympiacos?
Then there's a potential issue can arise, because I think we have seen this with Red Bull. They've got a couple of clubs who are in the UEFA. I think UEFA will deal with that problem if and when it arises. But that could be a cause for concern. And Olympiacos is a club in Greece, and over the weekend, I think there were accusations made about the integrity of the Greek league, which I've been aware of for some time. in terms of manipulating transfers, that certainly is a vehicle through which you can address FFP issues.
Right.
So if we take a look at the case of Aaron Moy was playing for, I think it was Melbourne City. He then went effectively on a free transfer from Melbourne City to Manchester City. They loaned him to Huddersfield Town for a year, so therefore they picked up a loan fee. And at the end of the season, they sold him to Huddersfield Town for around about 10 million, so they made a £10 million profit on the deal as well,
right,
having picked up the player for nothing. So this is where the accusations arise in terms of the multi-club ownership model. It makes a lot of sense in many points of view. It allows the City Group to identify a pool of players. It allows them to spread costs. So from a business point of view, the logic is there. It does happen to also raise these issues that we've just discussed.
Well, I don't think listeners will believe this, but subconsciously you and I are very good, because you mentioned Melbourne, and our next question's from Australia. It's all really, people will think, no, you've planned that. We haven't. We're just naturally good. This is a question from Ed Hall, who's a Brit living in Australia, and I hope you're safe and well out there, Ed, along with everybody else. He's been trying to get into the A-League, right, and he can't do it. It's just the standard's not good enough. But his question is the finances of other leagues, essentially. So how does the Premier League compare to other leagues around Europe? We've learned from this pod that the Premier League isn't financially as big as we perhaps believed it was. But is it bigger than the Bundesliga? Is it bigger than Spain, Italy? Where does it rank?
Oh, the Premier League is the most lucrative football league in the world. If you take a look at clubs in the A-League in Australia, they will generate as little as £3 million a year. Right. That would put them equivalent to a League Two club.
Oh, okay. Right.
The biggest clubs might get around about 20 million. That's around about the same as, say, Millwall. So that gives you sort of a sense of scale. The smallest club in the Premier League last season is likely to have been Huddersfield, and they will have had total income of 120 million, so 5 or 6 times as big.
Big difference, yeah.
Comparing to Europe, the big 5 leagues, and we're talking here England, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. Some of those clubs are on a par with the elite clubs, but when you drop down, it very, very quickly falls. So Huddersfield last season, they made more TV money from the Premier League deal than Bayern Munich did in winning the Bundesliga in Germany. So it's very much dictated to by football, and then you drop out of those 5 leagues, and the money in the Netherlands and Portugal and so on, unless the clubs are playing in Europe,
right,
is pretty small. So Ajax, I think they made 95 million euros last year, so that's about 82 million pounds. That puts them again below the smallest club in the Premier League, because they don't have the domestic rights, which are sold for huge prices. And then once you take Ajax out of the equation, the rest of the clubs are really scrabbling around.
Very briefly, where would Scotland fit in that league table?
Scotland is a classic case of the haves and the have-nots. Celtic, when they qualify for the Champions League and they get into the group stages, then they are knocking, again, still lower than Huddersfield, but not that far behind. This season, I think they'll be looking at around about the £60 million or €60 million mark, because they qualified for the Europa League. Rangers are narrowing the gap, again, driven more from UEFA participation than anything else. Right. Fans say that we sell 47,000 tickets a week, and both clubs get magnificent home support. But in terms of the ultimate impact that it makes, if you sell an extra 1,000 tickets at an average of £400 each by the time you strip out VAT, it doesn't make a huge impact to your top line.
Okay. Ed also adds a little PS to his question, which is say hi to Guy, as apparently they used to go to school together, which is very sweet. But come on, Ed, he's on Twitter. Say hello yourself. Don't be using us as a medium for spreading messages. Hi, Ed. Hi, Guy. Jack Smith has asked what I think is a big question, and I suspect I might have to stop you after a couple of minutes on this one, it being a short pod, and we might have to have a longer discussion about it in future, because I think it's a question that, without being specific, we all probably, every football fan in their back of their mind has probably thought of this question at some stage. And Jack's question is, why does the FA not contribute more to grassroots football? He lived in France for some time, and he talked about the investment there into coaches, pitches, stadiums, etc., which of course is paid off because they're World Cup winners.
Well, if you look at funding for football, it comes from 3 or 4 sources. You've got the National Football Association. The FA has put more money into football than the French football authorities. But, so that sort of scuppers his audience.
There was a brief pause there because I'd put my microphone down to blow my nose, but I wanted to say then realised I wasn't holding the microphone. So, and you can't see my eyebrows going up on a podcast. So. Let's carry on from
But then if we look at the other sources, we've got central government funding, that's been cut. We've got local government funding, that's been cut.
Well, it's both.
Yes.
Both words are equally valid in the circumstance. We're all adults here. And I'm not going to do what Sky always do and draw attention to it, saying, we're sorry if you're upset by the language you heard from 30,000 football fans there, but you're watching a football match.
And then you've got the clubs themselves. Now, the Premier League clubs, they do put an awful lot of money into coaching facilities. Now, admittedly, that they are the beneficiaries of that. But the Premier League, as we've established, yes, we think it's big. It's not as big as an industry as we thought it to be. And for every pound that the FA has put into grassroots football, there's been central and local government cuts of 10 times as much. So therefore, the net impact is negative. And there are. I'm not the FA's biggest fan in terms of the way that they have governance and transparency, and their attitude toward Berry was absolutely appalling. Yeah. I don't know whether you saw the DCMS broadcasts, but they do invest as much money as they can generate themselves, and they will probably now turn around and say that we're all hypocrites because we've been criticising them for the streaming rights deal with Bet365, which they will say, well, hold on, we were planning to reinvest that money into grassroots, and now you're slagging us off for it. So to a certain extent, they're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't, and they are an easy target, as is the Premier League itself. But these organisations all put huge sums of money into football. But we, as voters, and this is not party political, we have voted over the course of the last 20 years for we want to pay less tax. Okay, if you want to pay less tax, expect less money to go into football.
Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honey Crisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Well, also, I think, and I'm being a hypocrite here because I've thought you would go on for a long time, but I want to add to the content because I think you need to make a distinction between grassroots football and community projects in a way, because grassroots football itself isn't as important to clubs as it was 30 years ago, because the days when a scout would be walking past a Sunday league game and would recommend a player to a non-league team and we would get into a football, those days are long gone. But all clubs, either through the clubs themselves or through the foundations, plus the FA and the Premier League, are putting, as you say, a lot of money, but they're going into sort of community projects around football rather than grassroots football itself, if that makes sense. There is a distinction between football-related mental health charities, for example. A lot of people using football. In Croydon, there's a young asylum seekers team been set up to help. So all these projects are fantastic and brilliant, but they're not technically grassroots football. So I think people don't often see the work that the Football League and the Premier League and the clubs do, because it isn't visible. Because a player might come through the academy, but that's not really grassroots football anymore because the amount of money involved. I mean, it's a convoluted way of putting it, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yep. And are we being a little bit nostalgic here? Because I remember playing park football 40 years ago, and it was still, the goalposts were wonky. There was loads of dog poo on the pitch, and you had about 2 feet between your pitch and the one next door because the council were trying to cram in as many as possible. And between, I was playing football in the Manchester League. Matches were constantly being waterlogged or frozen. And that's not going to change, because you can't change these big urban areas into 3G and 4G pitches. We have big cities, we have big conurbations, and they're simply not fit for purpose to convert into something else. And also, football should be played on grass.
Yeah, I quite agree. And I'm going to put you down as an elegant midfield player. Am I right?
I was a barnstorming left back.
Were you?
Yeah.
I would never have guessed that in a million years.
Yeah.
I bet you were the sort though who never carried the crossbar back to the. Did you?
No, but I did used to organise the pegs for the nets and wash the kit every week and organise oranges.
No,
but
you should never prejudge somebody, should you?
That's right. My university career was cut very, very short. I made my debut. I'm colourblind. We were in red and white stripes. The opposition were in green and white stripes, and I was utter shite.
I was the opposite of barnstorming. I was a very slow and steady right back. Right. I was good in the tackle. Once I got there, I was quite a fierce little tackler.
Solid.
It was the getting there that was the problem. In fact, we had a discussion about this. We talk a lot of things about football in the pub before and after Palace games. We were reminiscing about the old days, and one of the lads said that they'd had a conversation about the top 12 players, and I jokingly said, "Am I in it?" And he went, "Yeah, but only because we couldn't remember 13 players." Final question comes from Chris. It's quite a technical question, so you'll like this. It's in two parts. Now, it's not unusual, as we've discussed, for directors to loan clubs money.
Yeah.
His first part of his question is, if the owner or the director turns those loans into shares, does that stop it becoming a debt?
Yes, it does. So therefore, there is no obligation to repay. Is
this common practice?
It has been common practice when clubs then used to try this as a means of making an FFP contribution. If the EFL take a harsh line on this, then I think it will become less popular. But if you're taking a look at what's happened with Charlton, Roland de Chachelet, he loaned the club £60 million. Now last week, Charlton converted £20 million worth of loans into shares. So I've not managed to get into the full detail of that, but it's always good, in my view, when you convert the loans into shares, except it means that the person who originally loaned the money now has more shares. So if we go and take a look at what's happened with...
This is done with the permission of the person who made the loan then, presumably?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, they'd have to agree.
Right, okay.
But if you think about it, if I own 60% of a football club and I've got other shareholders who've got 40%, so this is not dissimilar to what's happened at Glasgow Rangers.
Yeah.
And then the directors have said, well, we've got some loans. We're now going to convert those into shares. That means they've now got 80% of the club, and the smaller shareholders have got 20%. Now, Glasgow Rangers fans, they are very well organised, and I think they've got, I think it's Club 1872. They're very keen to have club, a portion of club ownership.
I'd go on holiday there, wouldn't you? Yeah, I'd definitely go. The way things are going, Club 1872. Sorry to interrupt, but I saw the opportunity for a cheap joke, and I thought I had to make it. It's my job. Carry on.
But they end up with a smaller proportion of the club.
Yes.
So that's the only potential downside. But if you've only got the one shareholder there, he previously owned 100%, he still owns 100%, it makes no difference.
Yeah, the final part of this pod, and is the final part of Chris's question. Morally, I think I know the answer to this question, but I think it's a perfectly valid question, and it comes off the back of discussions we've had about Bet365 at Stoke having a lot of money. It comes off us, apparently, PSG and Man City are technically debt-free. And Chris's question is, if owners are not leaving a club with debt by spending an awful lot of money, why shouldn't they be allowed to spend money they've got if we're guaranteed that spending that money won't affect the club? In other words, why do the rich clubs have to abide by financial fair play rules?
Because the other clubs have voted against it,
right?
And UEFA. I think we established sort of a few weeks ago that the biggest fear of PSG and Manchester City and the other elite clubs is another PSG. So what they've said, we've used those rules. We have both put billions in. Roman Abramovich has put billions into Chelsea. Thanks very much for that. And now we're closing the trapdoor because we want to win all the trophies ourselves.
Right. Okay. Very good. morally, yeah, that's the answer I expected you to give, basically. Thank you for your questions. We will be back on Thursday for our normal pod. The Price of Football is a Dap Dip production. I'm Kevin Day. The professor is Kieran Maguire. Please leave a review if you enjoyed it. Don't leave a review if you didn't enjoy it. And if you didn't enjoy it, we won't be here listening to you on Thursday. Yes, I'll get the days mixed up. They're working us too hard. Working us too hard, Kieran.
Thank you very much.
The Price of Football.
Cheerio, folks.
The Price of Football.